You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we focus on financial strategies for building a profitable food business. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan. We recently asked you to fill out our Good Food Revolution survey, and in that survey asked where you felt confident and knowledgeable when it comes to building your business on your own terms, as well as what areas you sought more information, education, and insight into. Nearly 100% of you that responded to the survey said you wanted to learn more about alternative sales channels. Aside from selling through distributors and retailers, how else could you get your product to consumers? And the channel that most of you were interested in particular, was food service. Well, I'm excited to share that today on the podcast, I am joined by Kim Bryden. She's the founder and CEO of Curate, an education, consulting, and procurement firm devoted to building an empowered supply chain to meet changing consumer demand. Kim is shedding light on the food service industry, the fact that there is much more to it than supplying restaurants, how the traditional food service supply chain works, and how Curate is disrupting that channel and helping to open doors for small, good food brands. I learned so much from Kim, and I think you will too. Let's get to it. Hey, Kim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I am really excited to talk with you today. There's so much that I want to cover, but before we dive into sort of the main topic of the day, I would love to spend a little bit of time on your background, because similar to me, from what I've read, it seems like you have sort of an interesting background where probably going through it, you had no idea you would land in the position you're in today.
That is definitely true. And I think I'm a product of global cultural things that happen to us maybe as elder millennials. And so when I was finishing up university, I thought I was going to work in the arts. I've always been someone who is a storyteller by nature, and I wanted to work in museums as a curator. And so the way my brain works is, what's the high level message that this exhibit wanted to tell, down to like the font on the wall, that oscillation between big picture to tactical detail is just the way my head works. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of jobs in arts during financial collapses, that of 08, 09. And so I, in part, put myself through school hostessing parties for Northwest DC families. And I would take coats and make drinks. And these guests were like, "Who are you? Like, what are you doing here?" I said, I graduated from American University, marketing and Spanish degree. And this was my intended path, but such is life. And I ended up meeting a representative from the Alcoholic Beverage Regulation Administration who does liquor licensing for the district. And they were like, "We're hiring." And I thought, well, it's a job, and food is kind of art. At the time, that's what I was thinking. And liquor licensing doesn't go away in a financial collapse, right?
Yeah.
People are still want to drink. And so I ended up taking that job, but simultaneously, I also got a conditional offer to work for the FBI. And the reason this is interesting part of the story is because I started with the background check process. And through my time working for the district doing liquor licensing, I started realizing, is this really the path that I want to be taking here? And a lot of the businesses I saw come into the office were the small business owners we either are or all know and love. And they'd come to me and just be like, "Finally, someone who knows how to use a computer." And I just got very interested in the process of starting and running a small business. Like, what were these barriers that were keeping people so disenfranchised or lack of access to opportunity? And the cultural zeitgeist was, and still is, small business, backbone of the American economy.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when I observed the situation, it didn't feel easy at all. In fact, it seemed like there were many roadblocks. And so this background check process is happening. I'm having these observations. I'm learning more and more about the DC food scene. I've been a district resident for 16 years now. This was just this moment of me realizing I actually think there's legs here around food and economic development and community that's emerging for me. And at that moment, Whole Foods found me, and I ended up getting an offer to work in their Northern Virginia stores on marketing and community development for a store that hadn't seen any sales increase that they would have liked. And I accepted that job. And 4 days later, the FBI called and was like, "You're cleared. Like, do you want to start?" And I said, well, I'm going to go work in the private sector. And they were like, "Oh, enter management consulting company, Deloitte." And I was like, "Nope, a grocery store." And so I share that as my, beginnings here, because from a very early part of my career, I always chose my values, even if I didn't actually know how anything was going to pan out. My baby boomer parents would have, I'm sure, preferred me to take a quote unquote stable career path, 401k, matching, government, etc. It was alluring. And again, in the middle of a financial collapse, so even more alluring. And here I was like, you know what? Nope, gonna work for this grocery store.
Yeah.
And over the years, after I worked at Whole Foods, I opened a store for them in downtown DC. Then I started getting really interested in consumer buying behavior and how to transition online engagement into offline purchases. And so I went back to school for digital media management and analytics at Georgetown to just try to understand more about that buying trend. And that pushed me into the food tech world. And the last company I worked for before starting Curate, they raised between $5 to $20 million. And I was on the scaling team. I was launching the product in different metros. And I just felt so disconnected from, I don't know, running an actual business. I was like, what is this baloney of valuations? Like, there is no stable cash flow at all. I want to work with people who actually are running businesses, who are creating economic impact and community jobs that people want, not this blip on the radar that's just going to like flame out in a year. Yeah. And so that's what lit the fire in my belly to want to start Curate and really understand who these community leaders are, starting and growing these businesses that are the bedrocks of our community.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I think somewhat unpopular opinion, what you said about evaluations and that sort of thing, but I'm with you. You have someone, in the same camp here. And I'm glad you shared that as part of your story. It's just so fascinating what our journeys look like and how we end up where we are. So Curate is celebrating their 8th birthday.
8th birthday.
Congratulations. Yes. Tell our listeners a little bit about what Curate does and what your goals are.
Mm-hmm. Well, building off what I just shared about this local community building, we exist to shift dollars back into our local ecosystems, our local economies, by building up this empowered supply, our small businesses, to meet this changing consumer demand. And consumer demand happens in lots of ways: direct to consumer, wholesale, the operative words here being supply and demand, matchmaking, if you will, and what needs to happen in these spaces in order for those two things to, dare I say, curate the connection between the two. And so that looks like 3 different verticals for us. The first is Curate Consult. We work with small business owners, founders, owner operators, if they're at a certain stage of growth where they're launching a new product or launching into a new market and need that extra brain around figuring out all of the different moving pieces that requires. A lot of people just think about one component that's often their strength and not the ecosystem that needs to be built around that pivotal moment. Yeah. It also looks like, on the Curate Consult side, us working with city governments and economic development departments who are looking to really do food systems strategy at a big scale of what might it look like if I build a processing facility to aggregate and process produce at scale to meet demand needs that I see in my backyard?
Yeah.
And so that's where we began as a business. And over time, our own business development bottlenecks were emerging because that's very project-based work, right? It comes and goes. And so I started thinking, what might it look like for us to offer our business development at scale and reach more business owners who might not be able to afford outside help at all times? And that might be because you're not at a certain stage of revenue, or it might be because you aren't born into networks of wealth. There's so many things that create that, but doesn't mean you don't have a good product or service. And so that's what led to Curate Courses. And Curate Courses is our 10-course bespoke curriculum. If you are watching a video, I'm holding up our cute workbook here.
Love it.
And we work with economic development departments or community development financial institutions, CDFIs, to deploy this technical assistance for groups of 10 entrepreneurs at the same time. And we often quip, you might make jam and not know how to run a jam business. You come to us.
Yeah.
And it's really the marketing, business development, sales strategy of what it looks like for you to start investing in and trying out new channels for your growth. And then the last piece of the puzzle is Curate Connect. And over time, graduating different people through Curate Courses, we've now had over 200 graduates, get a lot of pick your brain emails. And I started thinking about, okay, people are really looking for alternative sales channels, which might be a little foreshadowing to future things we'll discuss. But I, coming from a grocery background, can see the hurdles and barriers to getting into that part of our food supply chain. So what does it look like on the other side of the food supply chain, food service? And so at the same time, I'm having these thoughts around how do I sort of like unlock the keys to that castle? I happen to be in the room with quite a few anchor institutions, eds and meds, universities and hospitals, who were having that same discussion of like, how do we do this from a sustainability lens, a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens? Like, how do we not just buy from another big business?
Yeah.
And that was in Baltimore around 2016. And from there, that's where Curate Connect evolved and has now become the outsourced local purchasing team for these institutional food service accounts. And so they place orders with us. We're the ones finding and vetting and sourcing product for their operations. And we're really bringing things in that are tailored to their unique food service account, right? A hospital cafeteria is different than a convention center, which is different than a corporate cafeteria. So the fact that we can tailor product purchasing based on what they actually need helps reduce risk on their end, because they're just buying what they actually want to buy.
Yeah.
And so that mix of both sales and services is Curate's blended business model. And yeah, we've been profitable every year ever since.
That's amazing. Congratulations. I mean,
yeah.
So many people who come through the podcast say this, but Catfield's White was the first, that I heard say, passion meet profit. And it goes for those of us who are supporting the food brands, right? And creating change in the industry in our ways and the brands themselves, right? We all need to be profitable so that we can keep doing the work that we're doing. So congratulations on that. And congrats on 8 years. It's really exciting.
Systems change in general, like no matter what field you might be in, takes a lot of consistency and perseverance. But in order to do that as a small business, you have to also know what you stand for, but also adapt to continue to persevere. And so I think these different pillars of our business, to me, obviously, I made this up, but it makes so much sense to me in the evolution of our growth and also seeing where the economy is moving and how we're seeing different problems emerge and what we're
Yeah.
solving for. And yeah, I don't think I would have been able to do that if I had to stay in the confines of a box, back to our comments on like venture capital of like, you do this one thing and you just scale it and you just keep, I just see business as a bit more fluid to try and understand where that product market fit is, because the market is changing.
Yeah. I think the market is changing. And also, founders are identifying that there is not just one way to do something.
Yeah.
We polled our listeners and our community members and asked them, when it comes to building a business on your own terms, what do you feel really confident and knowledgeable about? And what do you feel like or know that you need more insight and knowledge around? And resoundingly, we heard from founders who said, we want to know what our other sales channel options are. We want to know who is disrupting the industry, where they're disrupting the industry, because particularly in the CPG space, the further you get into the distribution game, the more you understand that it's stacked up against you as a small business, and especially as a good food business. And I know that that's important for you as well in the work that you do. And so when you're mission driven and you have a purpose and you have an amazing product, and you hit these roadblocks or these institutions, right, where you're like, I don't want to play that game, you start to think, okay, what else can I do? And that's, I think, one of the main reasons I'm so excited to talk with you today is because I think we have an opportunity to dive into food service more. It was one of the specific channels that our founders called out in the survey that we sent. So I want to back up a tiny bit, and if you can, describe to anyone listening, or maybe detail for us, what is food service? Like, just like really from the beginning, in case there's anyone listening who doesn't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe most traditionally people might think of restaurants, like I'm just operating a space that's doing food service in that way, but I'm not going to talk about restaurants. That might be an initial click in someone's mind. So not that. We're not going to talk about that. What I'm talking about is when you go into spaces like a sports arena or a convention center or a university or a hospital, and there is a team, oftentimes a food service management company, that's overseeing the purchasing, the operations, the sales of all of those goods in that space. And it might mean both back of house food service, i.e., I'm making the meals that are then served at the hot bars, but it also includes the retail spaces. It could also mean the coffee bars. There's so many different places that food service management company might be deemed operating at. And so what gets really confusing for a small business owner is you might go into a space and think, oh, these are all different concepts, or maybe they're all owned by different entities. They are often are not. It's one company that's overseeing it all. And so what I find really interesting about food service is that these food service management companies, there are three that really dominate the market. And in order to do business with those, they will also structure their agreements with other national or multinational companies because they're trying to get the best deal of economies of scale across all of the accounts that they service. So their unique value proposition that they're bringing to possible clients, like that hospital or that university, is we're going to get you the best price possible because we've negotiated these most favorable nation contracts that give you this optimal price point. But then what that means on the end user's standpoint is they now have to hit certain sales targets of selling X amount of Pepsi, Coke, you name it, in order for them to stay in that like good graces of that contract. And so then at the customer level, a staff member of that hospital or the university student that's like, I don't want red dye, insert soda name brand. Like, why am I in a hospital drinking like some high sugar beverage? They there's a disconnect between that ask and the business reasons as to why that is happening. And all of those entities are purchasing through a Cisco or a UNFI or a KE or a Frito-Lay, distribution, which you're just alluding to. And so to really break into that space can be very exhausting and require you to continually have third-party audits to even be possibly procured from.
Yeah.
And so that's when I was like, this is a big disconnect from how their business model works and what the client is asking for. And the client being, again, the university, the convention center, the hospital.
Right.
Because the end user there, the student, the staff member is like, I don't want this. Like, I get this in the gas station.
Yeah.
There's just like not really a differentiation of product here.
Yeah.
And so I started talking to the client around where might there be opportunities in the way your contracts are currently structured to think about, where are the holes, if you will, around like supplier diversity and local spend that we could really start tapping into to address what your employees or students want to see. But then the person who handles the contracts is not the person who's placing the orders.
Mm-hmm.
And so anybody who's interested in this part of the food supply chain, I would really suggest that you remember the person who might be contractually talking with you is not the person who's the operator. And so it's important for you to really understand the why someone wants to do something, because you're going to have to work with many parties to get there.
Yeah.
It's not just like, I'm on a truck, bye,
Yeah. I want to go, this is all so valuable. Thank you so much for this. I want to go back to the beginning where you stated for us that it's not just about restaurants, which you're 100% right. I think a lot of people listening would think, oh, that's what we're talking about with food service, giant, 5-gallon containers of what I normally sell, right? So my product, but packaged in a larger volume, in different physical packaging. And I am sending it to someone else to serve or to include in a meal that they're going to serve, which could be the case in the type of institutions that you're talking about. But I think a really important point that you made is that it can also be your individually packaged product, that same product that you would sell on a retail shelf will show up on retail shelves at the hospital or any of the places that you mentioned. So there's opportunity in food service without changing the product or the packaging, which I think is a really key thing to shine a light on.
Yeah. And I think that when people are exploring these different sales channels, particularly with food service, we're trying to align a lot of people's value systems. And so, like I said, finding that shared commonality around, is it sustainability initiatives? Is it women-owned businesses? Whatever it is that can align with what you stand for really makes a difference. I have found even more so than large big box like grocery retail, because their constituents, again, that Gen Z student is going to be like up in arms if stuff is not changed. And the thing I'll also emphasize is that if you're going into grocery, one might ask of you, can we do deep discounts? What's your promo schedule? What's cross-merchandising plan we might do?
Yeah.
That is not required in these spaces, but what is necessary is still having that keen marketing storytelling component, because you will be so new.
Right.
And so that's the piece of the puzzle that Curate often brings to this, is not just the finding and vetting and sourcing of product, but also really the storytelling element, because this is not normal.
Right.
And people want to know that you're a person of and from their community. So the more a small business can be already prepared with fall's just around the corner and I have, this soup line that's like perfect, or I've got these pumpkin spice donut holes, whatever it is, that's what they want to know, because they want to feel like cool, honestly.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
more you can be that person generating marketing campaigns, social media content, in addition to producing your product consistently, storytelling really matters in these spaces.
That makes a lot of sense to me, as I'm putting myself in the consumer's shoes for a second, right? Even if you've spent time in the hospital with a family member and you're eating the food there, we all know the lackluster options that are typically available. Or even like in an airport, right? Where you're like, okay, we know what the run of the mill food is. And then you find a kiosk or something where you're like, oh my God, this looks like real food. Let me investigate. It's likely going to be a brand maybe you're not familiar with. If it's in your community and you are familiar, that's amazing. But sometimes there's brands that are coming in that maybe someone's not familiar with, and you have to sell yourself off that shelf, if you will, just like you would in a grocery store. So I think that's a really, really important tip that you had.
Yeah, but in a grocery store, maybe you're going to the grocery store because you know that they locally source and they're organic, right? It's already maybe self-selecting that person who would buy that thing that you're making. Whereas in these settings, that is not the case, right?
Yeah.
The staff is the staff. There's no, I'm going to choose this hospital cafeteria today versus that hospital cafeteria. So it's a different type of business development proposition that you have to make, but really eager people who want variety in their day. And typically in this distribution game, maybe a listener here might have encountered brokers who have a set amount of clients and they're repping your brand and product. And if they place you on a shelf, they're taking a cut. And so a lot of folks will ask us like, oh, well, you're just a broker. And I have to explain that we actually don't rep any small business. Like that's not a part of our strategy. Our client is actually the buyer.
Right.
And so we are genuinely working with them to figure out where are the holes in your inventory? What could we find that's a better or slightly around the price point you're currently buying that bag of chips wholesale? Like, could we swap that Slim Jim from a local beef jerky, right? So we have to be a bit more strategic and mindful about our unit costs and our delivery schedule with our local suppliers, because they're so used to just going with inertia with the broadline distributors. That's the norm and the default. And so back to my earlier statement of like consistency and perseverance and like active listening of like, well, what's the problem that you're having that I might solve for?
Yeah, I think so. The other thing that continues to stand out for me, and this is probably because I was a buyer, a food service buyer, technically, for a large catering company here in LA for a little while. And I was that rare breed who would go to multiple farmers markets a week, who would find that quinoa farm in Colorado and get my, domestically grown quinoa from them. That was what I was passionate about. That's what the company and the founders were passionate about, right? So they made sure that they had room in the budget to hire someone like me and allow me to do that work while still meeting the cost targets and the things that we needed to be successful. That does not exist. That role does not exist in the vast majority of organizations across the country, right? Mm-hmm. And not only that, but when we talk about the types of food service relationships that these are corporations, right? These corporations have shareholders. These shareholders want the companies to be profitable. We should all know how this works. And so they don't always care. And I've been told, quite frankly, by several of them, I'm not interested in having an organic strawberry because the commodity strawberries make me, $3 per unit and the organic ones make me 50 cents. So I'm quite happy with my commodity products, right? So there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot stacked against you in the traditional food service channel. But if you take your advice and you understand like where is the disconnect, where can my product fit in, that's
Mm-hmm.
great. But at the end of the day, if there is a buyer, and you said it too, the person signing the contract, right? There's a mission, there's a goal, they're signing that contract. The buyer probably has 1,000 things on their plate.
Yes.
They want to get through their task list. They want to get the goods ordered for the night and go home.
Yes.
So where does Curate step in and how do you eliminate this very, very big hurdle,
Mm-hmm.
which is the inability or the unwillingness to buy from multiple different small businesses rather than one of the big three?
You absolutely named it. And this is also what we teach in Curate courses. So, what often happens is small businesses are at varying degrees of being a small business. And so, let's say I'm talking with the buyer overseeing catering at a particular location. And they're like, I have this executive office breakfast coming up, and they really want to feature local. It's going to be 50 people. And like, this is going to be the marquee thing to get everybody on board. We want cold brew, we want yogurt, we want granola, we want pastries, and we're finding and we're vetting and we're sourcing, we're getting the price points, we're placing the orders, we're saying you have to be here by this time because this is an event and like it matters. Everyone's on it, they deliver, and then the pastry person shows up 5 hours late. And so now the buyer is like, that was the main source of breakfast. The other things were just accoutrements. Am I even going to say we have this local program anymore if this person can't even show up on time? So you might be thinking, oh, I make cold brew. My other competition is this other cold brew. But in this space, it's did that local business mess up? Then I'm not going to buy from any local business. Even though that pastry person had nothing to do with your cold brew, but they're buying things based on their set, right? Their retail space, their food service, their catering event. And if one thing doesn't happen, I have seen so many times buyers just be like, I tried local once. It just didn't work for me. And so the main thing we do at Curate, other than point out blind spots in someone being like, no one could make that, at the quantity I need. And I'm like, that's not true. Here's 4 options.
Yeah.
So other than that critical curation role, the other aspect I looked at was what user experience do they have with a Pepsi rep, a Cisco rep, whatever, and how can we centralize what is currently a decentralized supply to mitigate risk for someone to feel more confident to shift their dollar. That's our versioning hashtag, shift the dollar into local, because what they want is someone who responds, like answers emails,
Yep.
invoices on time, delivers on time. And so we don't actually handle any delivery. We place the orders. We're the ones who pay all of the small businesses, but you still have to be the one to drop ship or deliver to that location. And that's honestly been the most challenging, but also I can tell when a vendor is in a growth moment because of those interactions we have around your responsiveness to an order, can you show up and deliver on time when you said you would, which is why we have the education arm of our business. And it's also why our buyers trust us to be this, trusted partner, because they know if someone's going to mess up or if there is this growth opportunity, we see it as a teachable moment. Right. And we're not just like, see ya. I tried local once. It didn't work. Goodbye. No, we're like, okay, you've delivered late 3 times now. Do we need to set a new delivery window? Like, what's happening? And we'll have those conversations, which will not happen if you're going direct. So again, if you are going direct, it's just a word to the wise here that there's only so many times, which is very few, maybe twice, that someone will give you a shot. And if you're not answering your emails and billing on time, they're going to drop you.
Yeah. When you started talking about this, in my mind, I'm going to be honest, I was like, man, this is harsh. I don't know if that's true. And then I remembered in like actual instances where that did actually happen. And it even happens within businesses that are aligned in theory with what you want to do. I think time and pressure play a role. And you're so right. Like if something didn't get delivered, then it causes more work, right? For that buyer or for that chef or whoever it is on the other end that is supposed to be utilizing that product in whatever way that they're supposed to be utilizing it. There's extra work, there's wasted time. I mean, it just compounds and compounds and compounds. And you're right. Like there could be 9 companies who deliver perfectly and 1 who doesn't. And if that one thing causes enough pain, the whole process is out. I remember Thanksgivings in particular. I think I shared this story in a newsletter recently where a chef I worked with would never be prepared like in advance of Thanksgiving. And I would have, the full list of here are all the like amazing things that we can do. And inevitably half the menu would be not local because he would feel just pressured and out of time and unwilling to take a chance. And it was like, this is what we're doing here, So I think you bring up a really, really good point. And I also think let's check our pride at the door and go, okay, what don't I know? What don't I know about these relationships that I may have never been a part of before and that look very different than these other distributor or retail relationships that I've had in the past? And how do I make sure that not only I am doing a great job, but that, people in my cohort are doing a great job and other people within Curate's, list of vendors are doing a great job? It's really a cool thing that you've created.
Exactly. And thank you for saying that. And it's one thing that we really talk about in Curate courses is how are you uplifting one another, buying from each other? Maybe you're a food truck and you make kombucha, start buying his kombucha, y'all are buyers and partners as well. And then what are those cross merchandising opportunities? How are we, rising tides lift all boats here?
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited. I feel the next stage of Curate is really activating more of this vendor to vendor and peer to peer collaborations in these spaces that we've activated, whether it's like demoing together or you have a gifting idea together, but like Curate can't do it on our own, right? Like you also vendor have to show up and say, I'm just going to go back to my donut example. I have pumpkin spice donuts and I just met this person who does hot cider. If we want to do a donut cider, activation, like we're here for it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll ever book you, but you've now come up with like a cool campaign that I could just immediately tap should I need it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I hope more folks will start exploring is places want to feel connected to community now more than ever after COVID. I think we've also all realized the effects of a global, air quotes, efficient supply chain that often is breaking down, which has created this consumer consciousness around, shoot, maybe I should know what's produced and grown in my backyard on the off chance something happens again. Like people are curious now. I mean, in this 8 years of me doing this, in the beginning, me being like, hello, squeaky wheel in the corner. To now people being like, yes, and the and now is just breaking down systems that no longer serve us,
Mm-hmm.
small goals.
Yeah. Easy to
but
achieve. Yeah.
but at least it's not like, what are you talking about? There is more of a consciousness now.
Yeah. So I really view Curate as a disruptor in the food service supply chain, right? Because you're essentially behaving in a way, acting, serving like these larger businesses, but you're doing it with a very specific mission of curating smaller brands so that there is an avenue and a way in for them, which I think is just wonderful. You are doing this in certain areas, certain parts of the country. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we started, like I mentioned earlier, I've been in DC for 16 years. So started in the Mid-Atlantic, DC, Baltimore metro areas. So we cover Northern Virginia up through DC and all of Maryland is our Mid-Atlantic region right now. We're trying to grow down towards Richmond to like really flesh that out.
Love it.
And then during COVID, you can imagine the purchasing side of our business did take a hit. Like, what's a convention center in COVID?
Yeah.
That does not exist. And so I, being me, got in a car and I started driving across the country to see how small businesses in small towns were adapting to COVID. And I made an assumption that people were just going to close up shop and be like, oh, well, like Amazon, Walmart, like, forget it. I'm not doing this anymore. But in fact, I heard and saw the opposite of like, I will stay open, like in defiance, like I will keep this going. I don't want to live in a world with just like big box only. And I was like, yes, Heartland, woo. And so I got to Northwest Arkansas, which is the headquarters of Walmart, JB Hunt, and Tyson's. And I saw all of these campaigns to get people to move to the area. First of all, it's beautiful. I mean, it's the Ozarks, it's gorgeous, so much space, people leaving cities, wanting more space. Like that was a part of it. And I just said to the economic development team of the area, what are we doing to build more of a local and regional food supply chain? Places people want to hang out, people they want to buy things from, not just like Targets and Olive Gardens, like what is that strategy? And then about less than a year later, it actually might have been only 5 or 6 months later, we were recruited to open a second hub there. Myself was recruited as like an individual to like set up shop. And then I found an incredible partner there, a community development financial institution, a CDFI. Love CDFIs. They deploy capital to underrepresented founders. Find a CDFI in your community if you're looking for a lower interest loan or line of credit. They oftentimes do both. But anyways, this CDFI in Arkansas, they're called Forge, and they're the oldest revolving community loan fund in the state and started with ag roots. And so they helped more commodity farmers transition to organic farming and now have totally expanded their portfolio beyond food, but saw this same gap that I saw around this burgeoning food ecosystem that just needed some more technical assistance or financing or whatever. And so we've been partnered for this will be a year and a half, and we graduated 20 businesses our first year in Arkansas. And now we're slated to have 3 more cohorts until next June.
Amazing. I just think this is so great. And it's been amazing to meet you and get to learn about what you're doing. And, this is the change. There is a lot of what we're doing, right? Like the work that we do is so different from one another, but it's all connected and committed to the same larger goal and purpose. And it's just so wonderful to connect with you and others in the industry and to learn about what you're doing.
I could not agree more. I'm thrilled to meet you. And so many people spoke of you that I was like, this person has to be in my life. And so kudos to you for being so connected to community as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to keep talking, but for the sake of time for our listeners, I know every episode needs to end. It's like the worst part of my day when I have to wrap up the episode. But I want to ask one more question. And that is for the founders who are listening, who maybe we've piqued their interest, or maybe they're thinking like, this is something I want to look into. I come from a place of not every strategy is for every business, right? So maybe there's like one or two things that you can leave with our listeners if they're thinking about it. Like, where do we start? What do we need to consider? How do we go about like thinking about food service if we've not done it before?
Yeah, great question. I would first look at, in your community, are there spaces that you've seen a lot of, honestly, like some legislative priorities or economic development strategies around? For example, sometimes convention centers are often in tandem with their tourism agencies. And maybe your inn is being a part of their like visit XYZ location gift box. I'm just making this up right now.
Yeah.
But look at where people are saying that their priorities lie and start thinking about like, how do you fit there? Honestly, it's very similar to you thinking about like a hook in a PR campaign. It's International Women's Month. Like, I'm a woman in business. I'm going to pitch myself, but like, figure out what is your hook here to get yourself back to the storytelling, into that product mix. And if anybody listening, if you listener are interested in exploring, like, what does your sales sheet need to look like? Like, what does that sales strategy for you mean, both the retail and food service packaging? How do you come up with some of these interesting campaigns? We have a service called Curate Pro, which is like weekly coaching with a business to walk through those different strategies to come up with that game plan. Really think about what is the problem you are solving for this person. And I'm not saying you have to change to your point, it does not mean change your product. It's just being really thoughtful and mindful of like, what's the problem they're having? How am I the solution to this? And it can't just be like, tastes good.
Yeah.
Like, that's like less than table stakes. It just better taste good.
This is super helpful. And I'm also now thinking about, when you do sell into retail, right? It's about selling to the buyer, right? That's customer number one, and then selling off the shelf. And I think it's important probably to think that same way when you're approaching food service. Like, you have to meet the need. What is that? Like you said before, I think this is a big takeaway, is what is the disconnect, right? If there's a disconnect between what the buyer is currently buying and what their customer wants, and you can help to solve that problem, that's where a great fit can happen. So, and I think it's really interesting that you bring up the idea. It's such a creative way of thinking that I hope you've like opened people's minds to, tourism and convention centers. And I think it's such a great idea because, one of the things we talk about in sort of general sales strategy is sell in your own backyard, own your own backyard, right? Like, really be everywhere. And this could be an opportunity to achieve that goal through sort of air quotes here, unconventional channels or things we think of as less conventional, but they're great opportunity.
Absolutely.
So where can our listeners like find you, follow you, interact with you?
Yeah.
Where can we send them?
Well, best place to reach out is head over to the website, curate.co, CUREATE.co. And then our Instagram is @CurateCo. So @CUREATECO. Those are the best places, most responsive there. We have Facebook, we got Twitter. If you want to shout us any messages there, that's fine. But Instagram and our website is the best.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll also put those links in our show notes so that you can open those up and click right to Instagram and the website as well. Kim, this has been so awesome, and I know so valuable for our listeners. So thank you again for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I can't wait to continue being in collaboration.
Same. Have a great day.
Thank you.
If you didn't get a chance to respond to the Good Food Revolution survey and you want to share feedback with us, you can still let us know what types of information, education, and insights you'd like to gain from the podcast by sending an email to jointheconvo@thegoodfoodcfo.com. You can also share ideas for episode topics and even who you'd like to see as a guest on the podcast. I'll be back with a brand new episode in 2 weeks.